Huh. Wow. Look at that! My Frostpunk video actually got some views, like people that actually watch my videos. Let's make another one. So, my last video on Frostpunk covered how to win the game without citing any order/faith laws, and while I was making that video, I noticed something. Most people don't seem to be very good at this game. Like, I keep seeing comments about how people are barely scraping by on normal difficulty on the main campaign, or how people are failing to weather the last storm, which is very surprising to me, since I've always thought that Frostpunk was a relatively easy game. Not to say that I didn't have initial difficulties with Frostpunk, but that once I understood Frostpunk, it became really easy to beat. So I thought that I should at least bestow you all with my ultimate wisdom, my infinite knowledge. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just gonna give you some tips. Hopefully, improve your gameplay so then you can actually maybe beat the game. The very first thing that you need to understand about Frostpunk is that it's a strategy game. Okay, obviously it's a strategy game, but many players don't really understand what that means fundamentally. Frostpunk is a game where your previous actions from the beginning of the game will dictate how you will play at the very last stages of the game. So, the actions you make at the very beginning of the game are way more important than the actions later on. So you better make sure you know what you're doing, and you're doing everything you possibly can from the very beginning of the game. The second thing someone has to understand before they can really get a good grasp of the game's core systems is to understand the fact that as a player, you have to at all times keep growing and improving your city. If at any moment you feel fine and, everything's good, and you're not really improving your city, you're already losing. So always expand and improve your city, because if you don't, you will always lose. As one last thing to add to this general point, it's good to break down Frostpunk's core systems and mechanics in your mind. What I mean by that is to properly understand how all the systems work in Frostpunk and interlink with each other, so then you can use it to your advantage. For example, let's say you're having a major issue with sick people in your city. How do you solve it? The most obvious solution is to just build more medical facilities, or to improve what medical facilities you already have. But sometimes the better solution is to just improve heating across your city. Since people only get sick from being cold in this game, you can stop people from becoming sick in the first place just by improving the heatings of their homes and their workplaces. And this isn't the only situation like this in Frostpunk. There are many examples I could list out, but it shows that it's super helpful to understand how the systems and mechanics in Frostpunk interlink and work with each other. Alright, now with that fundamental stuff out of the way, we can get started in some more practical stuff. And the very first thing I want to cover is food. To put it simply, hothouses suck. Like really, they're absolutely shit. Terrible. You never want to build them. They consume your steam cores, a super important resource that you have a limited amount of. They need to constantly be heated at a certain temperature, and even after all of that, they still don't give you that much food. In comparison, hunter huts just give you food in exchange for some of your workers and literally nothing else. They really shine once you've gotten all the upgrades in the research tree, allowing you to get tons of food in comparison to the very little investment you're putting into them. So, in conclusion, only build hunter huts. Also, use sawdust. Sawdust is over fucking powered and makes food a fucking joke in the game. Oh, speaking of stuff that's useless, let's talk about bunkhouses. They suck. Really, they only provide one extra layer of warmth compared to tents, and they need steel in order to build them, so don't even fucking bother, and skip building bunkhouses and directly build houses once you got the house redesign research, since it saves you a ton of steel. Oh, and yeah, research. That's pretty important, isn't it? Yeah, so for research, this is what you're gonna need. 3 research buildings with extended shifts on all of them at all times. With that, you should be able to get most of the research that you need. Oh, and one extra general tip, I recommend improving your research level sooner rather than later, since being able to reach the higher levels technology early is super useful at rushing for specific technologies that you need at specific points of the game. Now, so far, all of these tips have been pretty normal. Use the right strategies, don't waste resources, research is important, etc., etc., etc. But there is one aspect that many players overlook when starting out in Frostpunk, and that's the fact that Frostpunk is a city builder. And like many other city builders, the placement of your buildings and facilities are really important to the health and success of your city as a whole. And the same can be said for Frostpunk. The placement of your buildings matter a lot because of heat zones. If you aren't forcing in as many buildings into a space as you can, you will have to pay for it later on by having to consume more coal by needing to build more steam hubs. And trust me, the amount of times I have seen poor building placement screw over a playthrough of Frostpunk is a lot. So, you need to understand how the game treats the size of buildings. Basically, depending on how you place your buildings, certain buildings might take up more space than they're supposed to. So, for example, if you place a building nearby a road, it might become larger than usual. As a player, you should be avoiding this effect as much as possible, since if it happens a lot throughout your city, not only will it make consistent placement of buildings super difficult, it will also waste a ton of space and materials in the process. And while I can't go into all the intricacies of how to specifically place buildings in the most efficient way possible in your city, I can tell you that you should always keep at least 2 things in mind whenever you're placing a building. First, try to place the same sized buildings with each other. For example, always try to place a tent next to another tent. Since they're the same size, they'll naturally fit together more nicely and take up less space. Second of all, try to always have this question in your mind. How will the placement of this building affect the placement of any future buildings? By keeping that thought always in mind, you should be able to avoid most of the issues that many new players face when placing buildings. Now, there are so many other things I could go over or mention, like how generator range is basically useless and only consumes coal, or how outposts are one of the most important pieces of things you could ever research in the game, but instead of spending all of my time going over that, I will just leave you with this reminder. The game likes to make you feel stressed out about things that don't actually really matter. Remember, the only way you can lose is if you max out on discontent or lose almost all of your hope. Outside of the rare exception of losing all of your people in a city, those are the only ways you can lose the game. So as long as neither condition of a loss is fulfilled, you're still fine, and you can still potentially win the game. So don't give up so soon and keep trying. Well, that's all I've got for you when it comes to tips in this video. Frostpunk is a genuinely enjoyable game with a super unique setting, and I don't think there's a lot of games that are really comparable when it comes to that feeling of, the incoming storm and the never-ending cold. So I hope that these tips in this video can help some of you that might be having some difficulties being able to actually dig your teeth into this game and actually accessing some of the really, really, really good content that this game provides. Anyways, that's all I've got to say, so I'll see you later.